The Prince, 2 Mice, and some Kitchen-maids. From 9 Unlikely Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Corrie Samuel. 9 Unlikely Tales by E. Nesbit. The Prince, 2 Mice, and some Kitchen-maids. When the Prince was born, the Queen said to the King, "My dear, do be very, very careful about the invitations. You know what fairies are. They always come to the christening whether you invite them or not, and if you forget to invite one of them, she always makes herself so terribly unpleasant." "My love," said the King, "I will invite them all." And he took out his diamond-pointed pen and wrote out the cards on the spot. But just then a herald came in to bring news of war, so the King had to go off in a hurry. The invitations were sent out, but the christening had to be put off for a year. At the end of this time the King had subdued all his enemies, so he was very pleased with himself. The Prince was a year old, and he was also pleased with himself, as all good babies are, and found the little royal fingers and toes a fresh and ever delightful mystery. And the Queen was pleased with herself, as all good mothers should be, so everything went merrily. The palace was hung with cloth of silver, and strewn with fresh daisies in honour of the great day, and after all had eaten and drunk to their heart's content, the fairies came near with the gifts they had brought to their godson the Prince. "He shall have beauty," said the first, "and wit," said the second, "and a pretty sweetheart," said the third. "Who loves him," said the fourth. And so they went on, foretelling for him all sorts of happy and desirable things. And as each fairy gave her gift, she stooped and kissed the baby Prince, and then, spreading her fine gossamer gauze wings, fluttered away across the rosy garden. The crowd of fairies grew less and less, and there were only 3 left, when the Queen pulled the King's sleeve and whispered, "My dear, where's Malevola?" "I sent her a card," said the King, casting an anxious look around him. "Then it must have been lost on the way," said the Queen, "or she'd have been here." "She is here," said a low voice in the Queen's ear. Suddenly the room grew dark, grey clouds hid the sun, and all the daisies on the floor shut up quite close. The poor Queen gave a start and a scream, and the King, brave as he was, turned pale, for Malevola was a terrible fairy, and the dress she wore was not at all the thing for a christening. It was made of spiders' webs matted together, dark and dank with the damp of the tomb and the dust of dungeons. Her wings were the wings of a great bat. Spiders and newts crawled round her neck, a serpent coiled about her waist, and little snakes twisted and writhed in her straight black hair. She looked at the Queen so terribly that her poor Mother Majesty cried out without meaning to. "Oh, don't!" she cried, and flung both arms round the cradle. The Prince was quite happy, playing with his new coral and bells, and looking at the palace cat, who sat at the foot of the cradle washing herself. "Now listen," said Malevola, still speaking in the low, even voice that was so terrible. "You did not invite me to the christening. I've read my fairy tales, and I know what's expected of a fairy who's left out on an occasion like this. I intend to curse your son." Then all the kings and queens who had come to the christening wished they had stayed away, and they and all the court fell on their knees and begged Malevola for mercy. As for the 3 good fairies who were left, they hid behind the window curtains, and the court ladies, peeping between their fingers, said, "Fancy deserting their godson like this! How unfairy-like!" But the Queen and the King only wept, and the Prince played with his rattle and looked at the cat. Then Malevola said mockingly, "Great King and mighty sovereign, Malevola was not good enough to be asked to your tea party. But your family shall come down in the world. Your son shall marry a kitchen-maid, and marry a lady with 4 feet and no hands." A shiver of horror ran through the room, and Malevola vanished. Then, Suddenly the sun came out, and people lifted up their heads and dared again to look at each other. And the daisies, too, opened their eyes again. Then the good fairies came out from behind the window curtains, and the poor Queen fell on her knees before them. "Can't you do anything?" she asked. "Can't you undo what she says, and make it untrue?" "Not even a fairy can make a true thing untrue," said the good fairies sadly. "Malevola's words will come true, but the Prince has already many gifts, and our gifts are yet to give, and these you shall choose. Whatever you wish shall be his." Then the King, recovering a little from the terror into which the fairy Malevola had thrown him, and remembering how well he and his royal line had always borne them in battle, said at once, "Let the boy be brave." "He is brave," said one of the good fairies. "He fears nothing." And at this the Prince ceased to feel any fear of the palace cat. He put out his hand and pulled her tail so merrily that Pussy turned and clawed the little arm till the blood ran. "Oh dear!" cried his mother. "He is fearless, as you say. I wish he was afraid of cats, poor darling." "He is," said the second fairy. "You have your wish." And indeed the Prince screamed and hid his face, and shrank from the palace cat with such horror that the King pulled out his pencil and notebook and wrote an edict then and there banishing all cats from his dominions. But all the same he was very angry. "Your Majesty has wasted one wish," he said very politely to the Queen. "Let us now leave the last gift in the hands of the last fairy." The last fairy came and kissed the Prince, who was now sobbing sleepily. "He shall be happy," she said. "He shall have his heart's desire." Then she too vanished, and the kings and queens took their leave when their gold coaches came for them, and presently the King and Queen were left alone with the silver hangings and the strewn daisies and the baby. "Oh dear, oh dear!" said the Queen. "This is dreadful! A kitchen-maid, and a lady with 4 feet and no hands!" "At least we are not likely to have a kitchen-maid with less than 2 hands," said the King. "We might arrange to have only titled kitchen-maids," said the Queen timidly. "The very thing," the King answered, "that would make the love affair all that one could wish. But there's still the marriage." "Of course he'll marry the lady he loves." "It's not the way of the world," said the King. "At any rate, let's hope he'll love the lady he marries. Otherwise—" "Otherwise what?" said the Queen. "We know nothing about otherwise, do we, my Queen?" he said, catching her round the waist. And in his love for his wife and his son the King felt almost happy again, for here they were all 3 together, and when your son is in his cradle his marriage seems very far off indeed. But the Queen was anxious and frightened, and while the Prince was still a child she sent messengers to the courts of all the neighbouring kings and queens to tell them what had been foretold, which indeed most of them knew, having been at the christening. And she begged such of them as had daughters to send them as kitchen-maids, so the Prince might at least fall in love with a real princess. And as the Prince grew up he was so handsome and so brave, fearing nothing but cats, which of course he never saw, though he dreamed of them often and woke screaming, and also so brilliant and good that, his father's kingdom being beyond compare the finest in all the round world, the young daughters of kings vied with each other as to who should find favour in the eyes of the Queen Mother, and so get leave to serve in the kitchen, each nursing the hope that some day the Prince would see her and love her, and perhaps even marry her. And he was very good friends with all the noble kitchen-maids, but he loved none of them, till one day he saw, at a window of the tower where the kitchen was, a bright face and bright hair tied round with a scarlet kerchief, and as he looked at the face it was withdrawn, but the Prince had lost his heart. He kept his secret safe in the place where his heart had been, and schemed and plotted to see this fair lady again, for when he went among the royal kitchen-maids she was not there with them. And he looked morning, noon, and evening, but he never could see her. So then he said, "I must watch o' nights. Perhaps she is kept in prison in the tower above the kitchen, and at night those who watch her may sleep, and so